Flames erupt through the roof of a wooden farmhouse in the black hours before dawn. A mother screams her children's names into the smoke as the walls begin to buckle and collapse inward. Within 45 minutes, nothing remains standing. 5 children are never seen again. Rewind 3 decades. In the hills of Fayetteville, West Virginia, an Italian immigrant named George Sodder built a life for his family after arriving in America as a boy. He married Jenny, raised 10 children, and ran a trucking business. To their neighbors, the Sodders seemed the picture of the American dream. By 1945, the war in Europe had ended, and the Sodder household was full. 9 of the 10 children still lived at home, the oldest son away serving in the army. On the night of December 24th, the family gathered as they always did, stringing lights, wrapping gifts, filling the house with warmth against the winter cold. Earlier that same day, a stranger had visited the Sodder home, selling life insurance. George declined the offer. As he left, the man reportedly warned that the house would burn, and that George's children would pay for what he said about Mussolini. George dismissed it as an odd threat and thought little more of it. George Sodder had never hidden his views. An outspoken critic of Benito Mussolini, he had clashed more than once with local men sympathetic to the Italian fascist cause. In a small mountain town, such arguments were not easily forgotten, and rumors of resentment lingered quietly beneath the surface of daily life. By midnight, the younger children were asleep upstairs, the older ones drifting off across the house. Jenny Sodder stayed up a little longer, tidying the kitchen. Outside, the temperature had dropped well below freezing, and the wind moved through the bare trees surrounding the house. Just after 1 in the morning, the telephone rang. It was a wrong number, a stranger's voice, oddly laughing before hanging up. Unsettled, Jenny noticed the downstairs lights still burning and curtains left open, small details that felt wrong. Minutes later, her daughter Marion woke to the smell of smoke. Marion ran through the house, screaming for her family. George and Jenny woke their older sons, and together they scrambled to reach the children sleeping upstairs. But the stairway to the second floor was already choked with smoke and flame, and there was no way through. George ran outside for the ladder that always leaned against the house, the one he used every day for his work. It was gone, moved to a place he had never left it. In the yard, the water barrel he kept for emergencies had frozen solid in the December cold. Desperate, George tried to start one of his own coal trucks to pull it beneath a window as a makeshift ladder. The engine, driven perfectly well the day before, would not turn over. By the time neighbors arrived with any real help, the fire had already consumed the upper floor. Someone ran to call the fire department from a neighbor's house, but the line was dead. It would later be discovered that the telephone cable serving the Sodder home had been cut, not burned, but severed cleanly, as though deliberately, sometime before the fire began. A neighbor finally drove into town to raise the alarm in person. The local fire department, though only a few miles away, did not arrive until well after 7 the next morning, more than 6 hours after the fire began. By then, the house had burned completely to its foundation. By morning, nothing remained of the Sodder home but a blackened cellar hole filled with ash and debris. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children stood in the yard, alive but devastated. 5 of their children, Maurice, Martin, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were gone. Officials searched the ashes and reported finding no identifiable remains, only a few small bone fragments later attributed to beef liver kept in the icebox. State police quickly concluded the fire had been accidental, the result of faulty Christmas tree wiring, and closed the case within days. Jenny Sodder could not accept it. She had studied fire, she said, and knew that a blaze hot enough to cremate 5 children completely would have needed far longer than the 45 minutes it took to destroy her house. She began to believe her children had not died in that fire at all. Strange details surfaced in the weeks that followed. The missing ladder was found, not lost, but carried and laid down in a nearby ravine. far from where George had left it. It seems someone had deliberately hidden it the night before the fire. A local woman came forward saying that during the fire, she had driven past the house and seen the faces of several children pressed against the windows of a passing car parked along the road, watching the flames. No investigator ever formally followed up on her account. The family also remembered the insurance salesman's warning from that same day and the threat that their children would pay for George's outspoken opposition to Mussolini. Rumors spread that men connected to the Sicilian mafia or Italian fascist sympathizers may have wanted George silenced. The Sodders also grew suspicious of the fire department's own delay. The local chief, they later learned, would go on to become sheriff of the county, and questions about the 6-hour gap between the fire's start and the truck's arrival were never satisfactorily answered by local authorities. Unsatisfied with the official explanation, George and Jenny hired a private investigator and began searching for their children themselves. They traveled to towns across the region, followed rumors, and interviewed anyone who claimed to have information, refusing to let the case rest. In 1952, the Sodders erected a large billboard along Route 16 near their former home. It bore photographs of the 5 missing children and offered a reward for information, a message aimed at every passing car for the rest of their lives. Over the years, reported sightings trickled in from across the country. A woman running a hotel in St. Louis claimed to have seen 4 of the children together in her establishment. A photograph, mailed anonymously to Jenny, appeared to show a young man resembling her son Louis, grown into adulthood. The Sodders pursued every lead they could, corresponding with strangers, chasing photographs and rumors across state lines. None of the sightings could ever be confirmed. Each one ended not in reunion, but in another silence. A fire investigator, later hired privately by the family, examining what evidence remained, argued the blaze showed signs consistent with an accelerant, suggesting the fire had been deliberately set rather than caused by faulty wiring, as officials claimed. The state, however, never reopened its investigation. George Sodder died in 1969, still believing his children had been taken alive from that house, still uncertain who had done it or why. The billboard remained standing along the highway, its photograph slowly fading under decades of West Virginia sun and rain. Jenny Sodder continued the search for another 2 decades, never abandoning hope that one of her children might still be found. She died in 1989 at the age of 88, having spent more than 40 years waiting for an answer that never came. The billboard finally came down in 1989, taken apart after Jenny's death by surviving family members who could no longer maintain it. To this day, the state's official record still lists the fire as accidental, and the 5 missing Sodder children as presumed dead. The Fayetteville property was eventually sold, the cellar hole long since filled in and overgrown. Locals still point to the empty lot where the house once stood, a quiet patch of grass that holds one of Appalachia's most enduring unanswered questions. No trace of Maurice, Martin, Louis, Jenny, or Betty Sodder was ever conclusively found. No confession was ever made. No arrest ever brought. What happened to them in those early hours of Christmas morning in 1945 remains, more than 75 years later, entirely unresolved. Somewhere between a fire that left no bones and a family that never stopped looking, the truth of that Christmas Eve remains suspended, neither proven nor disproven. Perhaps the deepest mystery is not what happened to the children, but how long a family can hold on to hope in its absence.